I want to ask you also about this idea that the anthem and flag seem to be used regardless, kind of the promise that they made that this would not be used. What can you say about that?
Well, yeah. We talked earlier about the European Constitution becoming the Lisbon Treaty and getting rid of the dreaded C word. But the other big promise we were made is, no. This new treaty has nothing to do with the state because the symbols of state, namely the flag and the anthem, have been dropped. Well, I can assure everybody listening that when the European Parliament new session opened on July the 14th, the first thing that happened was they played the anthem and everybody stood up ramrod straight, apart from me, of course, who sat there with my arms crossed, muttering very loudly, I thought you dropped all this. So, once again, it's yet another deception. What is happening here? What is happening here is individual nation states are having taken from them their ability to vote for people and to fire people who make their laws and run their country, and that is being taken away and being replaced by a new form of government based in Brussels, a form of government that is not directly accountable to the voters.
Do you think that they're trying to kind of create a new European identity as well, the Euro-nationals, as you refer to them, this idea of Europeanism, right?
Yes, they would like to think that in years to come, we'll say we're Europeans first and we're British second or we're Swedish second or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that our identity will be a European identity and there'll be a European football team and if there was a crisis, we'd all put military uniforms on and go out to fight for Europe. And that's what they'd like to impose. The evidence actually is that however hard they try and however much money they spend in our schools and universities convincing us of our European identity, that in fact we're going in the opposite direction. And that people are beginning to feel much more identity with their own nationality and in some cases with their own region. So yes, it's an aspiration of theirs, but like so much else with this union, it's not much more than a pipe dream, really.
Tony Blair as a potential future president of the European Union, any thoughts?
Well, many people think that Tony Blair, if he became president of the European Union, somehow the British would suddenly overnight fall in love with the whole thing. I take the opposite view. I think that if Blair becomes the president, if Lisbon is ratified, I think people will take the view here overwhelmingly that this was a reward, selling out British democracy, but picking up the top job himself. And I would have thought that a Blair presidency would make the EU even more unpopular in Britain. So in that particular regard, I'm not necessarily opposed to it.
I want to ask you a little bit about this idea about EU as a kind of future Soviet state again. This is an undemocratic process that we see now in the EU, and there are several people, former Soviet dissidents that have defected, so to speak, that have warned about this. Is this something that you see as well?
Well, yeah, there's a very, very famous guy called Vladimir Bukovsky,
yes,
who for 12 years was in and out of mental institutions in the Soviet Union and spent time in the Gulag, and he was swapped for a prisoner and came to Britain in the 70s. And one of the things that Vladimir talks about is the fact that there are some strong similarities between that union and this union. The idea that you can have centralized control, the idea that you can plan 5, 10, 15, 20 years ahead, the sort of famous Soviet 5-year plans, and the idea that you can't tolerate any criticism of the system at all, and that you make sure that at no stage do voters have any real power. These are similarities, and what we've got here, yes, we have a European Parliament, but the government of Europe is the European Commission. These are unelected, appointed, professional career politicians, and these are the people making decisions that affect every business and affect the life of every single person. And I really do think, I'm not going to say that it will become just like Soviet Russia, because that wouldn't be sensible. We're living in different times. But I think the tendency to be centralized, to be bureaucratic, to technologically fall behind, and to treat democracy with contempt, I think they are very similar and very common features.
I want to ask you a little bit about Barroso as well. Do you think that he has some kind of more socialist ideas, considering that back in, I think it was 1976, he was actually a Maoist student leader? Do you think that he's brought some of that with him into the position that he now holds?
I don't get terribly hung up or whether people are socialists or not. What I get hung up about is, are they statists and are they European statists? And Barroso is a statist. He wants the EU to do more and more and more. He believes that more and more legislation somehow makes the world a better and more prosperous place. I do not take that view. I think we already have far too much legislation. And I also, personally, can never, ever have any regard for Barroso as a person because of the contemptuous way on that particular afternoon that he dealt with the Irish no result, just brushing it aside and saying, effectively, the Irish don't matter, we're going to continue anyway. So this man has total contempt for the concept of parliamentary democracy, and I will not be voting for him when we vote in September for his reappointment. I shall vote against and do so very firmly.
And I think that Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, who was originally kind of drawing up the constitution, also said something about this in the French magazine Le Monde, that pretty much that we can avoid what the Irish people said and actually run it through anyway, right?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, in effect, they've been doing that for years. I mean, even under the existing treaties, there are various articles that do allow the European Commission to have an extraordinary degree of power. But I think the important thing about the Irish vote, it's about symbolism. It's about symbolism. It's about showing once again that this model of Europe is being imposed upon people against their wills, and that the gap that exists between the governors and the governed is now a gaping chasm. And at some point, because nature abhors a vacuum, at some point that vacuum is going to be filled. And to me, the important thing is that we fill that vacuum with people who are committed to free and fair referendums, are committed to democracy, and that we don't get the vacuum filled by extreme nationalism, because that, to me, is one of the great dangers. Imposing a European statehood upon people could well, in many countries, lead to a serious rise in extremist politics, and I don't want to see that at all.
Yeah. So you are on the ground floor, so to speak. I want to ask you just a little bit if you can share with us what it is like. How much documentation do you go through? Do you manage to keep up with all the new laws that are passed? Do you have time to read everything?
No. I mean, let me be absolutely honest with you. When I go into that chamber to vote, 90% of the things I vote on, I haven't got a clue what they are.
Oh, really?
I mean, and it could be, of course, that I am particularly stupid, and it could be that I'm surrounded by 500 people, all of whom have the brains of Albert Einstein, and have been up all night reading thousands of pages of documents. I suspect that I'm not especially stupid, and I'm pretty certain that, in fact, there aren't many Albert Einsteins sitting in the European Parliament. I mean, we have days there when we vote on up to 1,000 amendments.
Oh, God.
There is nobody in this world who can understand all of those things. And so we have a system where each MEP, by their own secretariat, are given a voting list, and if it's vote number 58 and you're told to abstain, you just abstain. It is an appalling system, but it is a symptom. It's a symptom of a European Union that never-endingly churns out, spews out, you might say, an absolutely massive volume of laws. And we're now in a position where 75% on average of the laws that are made in each of our member states are not made by our own governments in London or Stockholm, but are made by the institutions of the European Union.
Yeah.
And this is something that I think people have been slow to recognize, but they're beginning to wake up to. And the worst aspect of it is this. If any law becomes a European law, there is nothing we, the voters, can do at any subsequent general election in our country to change that law. And that, to me, is the fundamental betrayal of the concept of democracy within a nation state.
Is there anyone who's kind of more of an ally with you, so to speak? I'm thinking of the Danish MEP Jens Peter Bonde, for instance.
Well, I mean, I sat with Bonde for the first 10 years of my time in the European Parliament, and Bonde and I sat next to each other, and we were co-presidents of the Independence and Democracy Group in the last Parliament, and I am keen to work with as many MEPs who believe these issues should be decided by the people and not decided by career politicians, as is possible. We have a new group in this European Parliament. Last time round, of course, we had the Journalisten people with
Yeah,
us
that's right.
who have not come back to the Parliament, which I'm sad about because they were very conscientious and very diligent people with some very good and very sound principles. But we've got a new group in this Parliament, and it's called the Europe of Freedom and Democracy, and we're there as a registered group. We're the only official voice of opposition within that European Parliament, and we intend to do our job.
Oh, brilliant. Is there anything people can do to help and support that in any way?
I think the important thing is to look at what we're saying, look at what we're doing, and to let your own career politicians know that you are unhappy